I'm Ashley, 29 female. I live in a quiet suburb just outside a major city, in a house I bought with my own money, a house that has a rather disproportionately large, climate-controlled garage. That garage is my sanctuary and my life's work, because I don't just invest in stocks, I invest in rolling art. This story is about my 12 cars, worth a combined $1.8 million, and how my own parents gave me an ultimatum. Sell them all to buy my unemployed sister a house or be cast out of the family. They thought they had me backed into a corner, but they underestimated just how much I was willing to do to protect my legacy and teach them a long overdue lesson about responsibility. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandfather was a man who believed in two things: hard work and the internal combustion engine. He wasn't a collector in the modern sense of sterile, untouched museum pieces. He was a driver. He bought cars he loved, cars that spoke to him, and he drove them until the day he couldn't. He was a mechanic by trade and an artist by soul, and every vehicle he owned was a testament to his passion. When he passed away, I was 21, and he left me his entire collection, 4 vintage cars and the seed money he'd meticulously saved, which he told me to invest wisely so you can buy the rest of their friends. His cars weren't just metal, they were stories. There was the '67 Shelby GT 500 he'd bought new, its Highland green paint still gleaming. There was the '57 Porsche 356 Speedster, a nimble little machine he'd raced in his youth. Each one had a history, a soul, and a piece of him baked into its leather and steel. My parents, David and Susan, saw it differently. They saw a windfall, a pile of cash waiting to be unlocked. "You should sell them, Ashley," my father had advised just weeks after the funeral. "Put it into a sensible index fund. Cars just depreciate." I remember smiling politely and saying, "Grandpa told me to look after them, Dad, and I will." And I did. I took that seed money, finished my finance degree, and threw myself into the world of investment analysis. I was good at it. I had a knack for seeing patterns, for understanding risk, and for staying disciplined. While my friends were buying trendy clothes and going on expensive vacations, I was living frugally, pouring every spare dollar into two things: my portfolio and the car collection. Over the next 8 years, I grew Grandpa's legacy. I added a '71 Lamborghini Miura, an '89 Ferrari F40, and a stunning '63 Aston Martin DB5. I didn't just buy them, I learned them. I spent weekends with Leo, my friend and a genius restoration specialist, getting my hands dirty. I could tell you the firing order of a Colombo V12 engine and the correct torque specs for the lug nuts on a Porsche Fuchs wheel. The collection wasn't just an asset on a spreadsheet. It was my connection to my grandfather, my passion, and the tangible result of every sacrifice I'd made. My parents never understood. They saw the garage as a bizarre, extravagant hobby. My father, a retired civil engineer, viewed everything through a lens of practicality and function. To him, a car was a tool to get from point A to point B. Anything more was frivolous. My mother, a kind but conflict-averse librarian, simply deferred to my father's judgment. They'd visit my house, glance into the garage with a polite but vacant smile, and change the subject. My sister Megan was the polar opposite of me. At 24, she was still living at home, flitting from one passion project to another. One month she was a painter, the next a jewelry maker, then a social media poet. None of these endeavors ever produced a stable income. My parents enabled her, celebrating her artistic spirit while quietly paying her bills. They saw her as a free spirit who needed protection from the harsh realities of the world. They saw me as the stable one, the one who had it all figured out. My success wasn't something to be celebrated, it was a resource to be tapped. The phone calls always followed a script. "Ashley, honey, Megan's car needs new tires and she's just so stressed about it." Or, "Your sister is feeling a bit down. Maybe you could take her on a shopping trip." I always helped, of course. I'd send the money for tires, I'd take her to lunch, I'd offer to help her build a website for her art. But my help was never a solution, it was a temporary patch. It never occurred to my parents or to Megan that the real solution was for her to get a job. The family dynamic was set in stone. I was the provider, Megan was the project, and my parents were the managers. I tolerated it because, despite everything, they were my family. I loved them, and I held on to the hope that one day, Megan would find her footing and my parents woo. LD finally see me, not just my bank account. That hope, however, was about to be put to the test in the most brutal way imaginable. The rumblings started subtly, a few months before what I now call the ultimatum. My parents began making comments about the housing market. "It's just impossible for young people to buy a house these days," my mom would sigh over Sunday dinner. "Megan is so worried she'll be renting forever." My dad would nod grimly. "A real shame. A person needs a home to build a life." I agreed with them, offering practical advice. "She could start with a small condo," I suggested. "I could help her with a budgeting plan to save for a down payment." They would exchange a look, one I couldn't quite decipher at the time, and change the subject. They weren't looking for a plan. They already had one. They were just laying the groundwork, testing the waters before they dropped the bomb that would shatter our family and force me to make a choice I never thought I'd have to face. The 12 cars in my garage weren't just a collection. They were my freedom, my hard work, my tribute to the man who believed in me. I was about to find out what my family truly thought they were worth. The bomb dropped on a Tuesday evening. It was a planned ambush disguised as a family dinner. My mom called me on Monday, her voice syrupy sweet. "Ashley, honey, we haven't had a proper family meal in ages. Can you come over tomorrow? I'm making your favorite pot roast." I should have known something was up. My mom only made pot roast for celebrations or for softening bad news. Still, I agreed, pushing aside a flicker of unease. I genuinely missed them, and the thought of a quiet dinner sounded nice. The moment I walked through the door of my childhood home, the atmosphere felt heavy. My dad, David, was pacing in the living room, a stark contrast to his usual routine of settling into his armchair with the newspaper. My mom, Susan, was fluttering around the kitchen, avoiding my eyes. Megan was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, looking uncharacteristically sullen. "Hi, everyone," I said, trying to inject some cheer into the room. My mom gave me a brief, tight hug. My dad grunted a hello. Megan didn't look up. We sat down for dinner, and the small talk was painfully strained. My dad asked about the stock market with a detached air, my mom commented on the weather, and Megan remained silent. They were just moving pieces around a chessboard, waiting for the right moment to say, "Checkmate." The moment came after the plates were cleared. My dad steepled his fingers, a gesture he always used when he was about to deliver a lecture. "Ashley," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your mother and I and Megan have been talking. We're worried." I braced myself. "Worried about what?" "About Megan's future," he said, glancing at my sister, who finally looked up from her phone, her expression a careful mix of vulnerability and expectation. "She's 24 years old and she has nothing to her name. No career, no savings, no home. It's not right." I felt a familiar frustration bubble up but kept my voice even. "I agree. I've offered to help her with her resume, to connect her with some temp agencies to get her started." My mom cut me off, her voice trembling slightly. "That's not the kind of help she needs, dear. She's an artist. A corporate environment would crush her spirit." This was their favorite line, the shield they used to protect Megan from any expectation of responsibility. "What she needs," my dad continued, his voice hardening, "is security, a foundation. She needs a house." I stared at him, confused. "Okay, and how is she going to afford a house?" This was it, the moment the trap was sprung. My dad leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "She's not, you are." I actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "What?" "Dad, I can't just buy my sister a house. A down payment, maybe, but an entire house in this market? That's hundreds of thousands of dollars." "We're not talking about a down payment," he said calmly. "We're talking about the whole thing. A nice 2-bedroom place in a good neighborhood, something around 400,000. The room fell silent. The number hung in the air, so absurd, so utterly disconnected from reality that I felt like I was in a dream. I looked at Megan, expecting her to be embarrassed, to jump in and say it was a crazy idea. But she just sat there, watching me, her eyes wide and hopeful. She was in on it. This was their coordinated plan. Where on earth do you think I have $400,000 in cash just sitting around? I asked, my voice rising. My father's gaze was cold as ice. We know you don't, but you have assets. You have that garage full of toys. It felt like a punch to the gut. My cars, my grandfather's legacy, my life's passion, they weren't toys. They were the product of a decade of discipline and hard work. You want me to sell my cars? I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Not all of them, my mom said quickly, as if that made it better. Just a few. That red one, the Ferrari that must be worth a lot, and maybe the Aston Martin. That should be enough to cover the house and then some. They had discussed this. They had gone through my collection in their minds, appraising my life's work like items at a pawn shop, deciding which pieces of my soul they would sell for Megan's comfort. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. No, I said, the word firm and clear. Absolutely not. Megan's face crumpled. But Ashley, it's not fair, she wailed, the practiced cry of a child who had always got her way. You have so much and I have nothing. All I want is a little place of my own to do my art. Then get a job and save for it like I did, I snapped, my composure finally breaking. I started with nothing but what Grandpa left me, and I worked my tail off to get where I am. You can do the same? It's not that simple for her, my dad thundered, slamming his hand on the table. Your sister is sensitive. You've always been the tough one, the practical one. It's your responsibility as the older sister, as the one who has been fortunate to help your family. The word fortunate was like a lit match on gasoline. Fortunate? I wasn't fortunate, Dad. I was disciplined. I sacrificed. While you were paying for Megan's art supplies and telling her to follow her dreams, I was working 70-hour weeks, eating ramen noodles and reinvesting every penny. This isn't fortune, it's the result of choices. My mother started to cry. Ashley, please don't yell. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. We're a family. Families are supposed to support each other. This isn't support, Mom. This is theft, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense register. You are asking me to liquidate my life's work, my inheritance from the grandfather you all barely mourned, to hand over the profits to my sister who has never worked a day in her life. The answer is no. My dad stood up, his face purple with rage. Then you have a choice to make, Ashley. You are either a part of this family or you are not. If you will not do this one thing for your sister, then you are telling us that those cars are more important than we are. If you walk out that door without agreeing to this, don't bother coming back. It was the ultimatum, my cars or my family, my passion or their approval. For a moment, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But their love, I now realized, had conditions. It was conditional on my utility, on my willingness to be their personal ATM. I looked at their faces, my father's rigid fury, my mother's tear-streaked disappointment, my sister's selfish pout, and the despair was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had made their choice. Now I had to make mine. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I guess you have your answer, I said quietly. I walked out of the house, the sound of my mother sobbing behind me, and didn't look back. The war had begun. The days following the ultimatum were filled with a deafening silence. My phone, usually buzzing with texts from my mom or links to funny videos from Megan, was dead quiet. It was a strategic silence, a classic tactic from their playbook. They were icing me out, expecting me to crumble under the weight of their disapproval and come crawling back, checkbook in hand. In the past, it might have worked. I had always craved their approval, always bent over backward to be the good daughter. But something inside me had snapped that night. The clarity I felt walking out their door hadn't faded. It had sharpened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The first few days, I was just angry. I'd pace my house, replaying the conversation in my head, the sheer entitlement of their demand fueling my rage. How could they? How could they look at my life's passion, the one tangible link I had to my beloved grandfather, and see nothing but a price tag? How could they value Megan's comfort over my life's work? It wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete and utter lack of respect for me as a person. They didn't see my long hours, my sacrifices, or my achievements. They just saw a resource, a magic money tree they could shake whenever Megan had a new whim. My anger soon gave way to a profound sadness. I was mourning the family I thought I had. I realized that their love was a transaction and the terms had just been laid bare. I was valuable to them as long as I provided. The moment I set a boundary, the moment I said no, I was cut off. It was a harsh and painful truth to swallow. During this time, my friend Leo was my rock. He came over the day after it happened, finding me staring blankly at the polished hood of the Shelby GT 500. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of hurt and disbelief. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression growing grimmer with every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, wiping a spot of grease from his hands with a rag. "Ash," he said, his voice low, "this isn't new. This has been building for years. You've just been too close to see it." He was right. I started looking back, connecting the dots. The endless loans to Megan that were never repaid. The way family gatherings always revolved around her latest drama. The way my achievements were met with polite but brief acknowledgement before the conversation shifted back to Megan. I was the family bedrock, taken for granted, while Megan was the delicate flower that required constant tending. The silence from my immediate family was broken by a series of passive-aggressive attacks from the periphery. My Aunt Carol called, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Ashley, dear, I heard there was some disagreement. Your mother is just devastated. You know how much she worries about Megan." It was a guilt trip, plain and simple. I was polite but firm. "I'm sorry Mom is upset, but this is a private family matter." Next came an email from my cousin Mark. "Heard you're not helping Megan out." "A bit rough, isn't it? I mean, what are you even going to do with all those cars? It's not like you can drive them all at once." It was clear my parents were orchestrating a smear campaign. They were painting me as the selfish, greedy daughter who hoarded her wealth while her poor, struggling sister suffered. They were controlling the narrative, turning my relatives against me one by one. The whispers were everywhere. I imagined them at family gatherings I was no longer invited to, shaking their heads and saying, "It's such a shame about Ashley. All that money has changed her." The thought was infuriating, but it was also clarifying. They weren't just trying to manipulate me, they were trying to isolate me. They wanted me to feel so alone that I would have no choice but to surrender. The real discovery, however, came from an unlikely source. My grandmother on my mother's side, a wonderfully sharp and no-nonsense woman in her 80s, called me. She lived 3 states away and usually stayed out of family drama, but she had a radar for injustice. "Ashley," she said, without any preamble. "Your mother called me yesterday, told me the whole sorry tale from her point of view. Now I want to hear yours." I told her everything, just as I had with Leo. I didn't spare any details, including the exact words of my father's ultimatum. When I was done, there was a long pause on the line. Then my grandmother sighed. "I'm not surprised," she said, her voice heavy. "Your mother, bless her heart, has always put Megan on a pedestal, and your father, he thinks money can solve any problem. They've crippled that girl with kindness." Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "Your mother let it slip that they've already been looking at houses with Megan. They even put in a contingency offer on a place last week." A contingency offer. An offer that is contingent on the sale of an asset. My asset. My cars. They hadn't just asked me, they had presumed my compliance. They had already picked out a house for Megan and made an offer on it, fully expecting me to roll over and sell my collection to pay for it. They had promised a real estate agent and a seller that my money, the money I had bled for, was already theirs to spend. This wasn't a request anymore. It was a premeditated financial assault. They weren't just asking for a handout, they were trying to corner me into a legal and financial obligation. The betrayal was deeper than I could have ever imagined. The whispers behind my back were bad enough, but this was a tangible action, a step taken in the arrogant certainty that I would cave. My sadness and anger coalesced into something new, a cold, methodical determination. They thought they could manipulate me, isolate me, and force my hand. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The revelation from my grandmother that my parents had already made a contingency offer on a house for Megan changed everything. It elevated their scheme from a mere case of familial entitlement to something verging on fraud. They were making financial commitments based on assets that weren't theirs, leveraging my life's work without my consent. This new knowledge gave me a target. I was no longer just defending myself against emotional manipulation. I was now investigating a tangible plot. My career as an investment analyst had taught me one crucial skill: how to follow the money. People's true intentions, stripped of all emotional pretense, are often laid bare in their financial records. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan. How far had they gone? What exactly had they promised? Who else was involved? I started with the house. My grandmother, bless her sharp memory, recalled my mother mentioning the neighbor. Willow Creek, because it's so close to that new organic market Megan loves. It was a start. Willow Creek was an affluent, trendy area. A quick search on real estate websites for recently listed two-bedroom homes gave me a handful of possibilities. I cross-referenced them with my grandmother's other tidbit. They loved the one with the big yard for a future dog. There it was. A charming little bungalow with a freshly painted blue door and a sprawling, fenced-in backyard. The listing status was contingent. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real. I now had an address and a listing agent. My next step was more delicate. I couldn't just call the agent and ask about the offer. They wouldn't tell me anything due to client confidentiality. But I could gather information around the edges. I created a fake email address and a persona, a prospective buyer who had just missed out on the property. I sent a polite inquiry to the listing agent. "Hello, my husband and I absolutely adored the house at 123 Bluebell Lane, but saw the status just changed to contingent. We are so disappointed. Is there any chance the current offer might fall through? We are cash buyers and can close immediately if it becomes available." The phrase cash buyers is bait in the real estate world. It signals an easy, uncomplicated sale. As I'd hoped, the agent replied within an hour, likely eager to keep a backup option in her pocket. "Thank you for your interest. The current offer is contingent on the sale of another asset, which can sometimes be unpredictable. I'd be happy to keep you informed if anything changes." The sale of another asset. She had confirmed it. I now had proof that my parents had represented my car collection as the source of funds for their offer. But I needed more. The house was one piece of the puzzle, but I suspected Megan's financial dependence was a much deeper rabbit hole. For years, I had been sending her money for emergencies, car repairs, dental bills, art supplies. I had always assumed these were one-off situations. Now, I wondered if I was her primary source of income. I spent a weekend going through my bank statements for the past 5 years, highlighting every transfer I'd made to Megan or my parents on her behalf. The total was staggering. It was well into the tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't just emergency funds. It was a consistent, monthly subsidy that I had been too busy or too trusting to notice. Then, I remembered something else. A few years ago, my parents had asked me to co-sign on a credit card for Megan, just to help her build her credit score. It was a card with a small, manageable limit, or so I thought. I had foolishly agreed, trusting they would ensure she used it responsibly. I had access to the online statements but had never checked them, assuming my parents were handling it. My hands trembled as I logged into the credit card portal for the first time. The balance was maxed out. I clicked on the transaction history and my heart sank. It wasn't for emergencies or credit building. It was a logbook of a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Expensive brunches, designer clothing boutiques, ride-sharing services for trips across town, subscription boxes for everything under the sun. She was living the life of an influencer on my dime, funded by my credit. And the monthly minimum payments? They were being automatically drafted from a bank account, one I didn't recognize. This was the final piece. I had the routing and account number from the payment information. It took some creative but legal sleuthing, using resources available to me through my professional network to trace the ownership of the account without accessing its private details. It was a joint account in the names of David and Susan, my parents. They were paying the minimums on the credit card they'd encouraged me to co-sign for, a card Megan was using to fund her lifestyle, all while telling me she was a struggling artist. They weren't just enabling her, they were actively managing her dependency, using my money and my credit to do it. The picture was now horrifyingly complete. This wasn't a recent, desperate idea born of concern for Megan's future. This was the culmination of a long-term strategy. They had spent years slowly bleeding me dry, subsidizing a lifestyle for my sister that was completely unsustainable. When the credit card maxed out and my small handouts were no longer enough, they escalated. They decided to go for the big score, force me to sell my collection to buy her a permanent, mortgage-free life of leisure. My investigation had started as a quest for confirmation, but it had uncovered a conspiracy. My family had been financially exploiting me for years. The ultimatum wasn't a plea for help. It was a demand for payment from the bank they thought would never close. The anger I felt was pure and cold. There was no room for sadness or doubt anymore. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had committed a profound act of financial deception. The plan that began to form in my mind was no longer just about protecting my assets. It was about severing the financial ties that had bound and blinded me for so long. It was time to shut down the Bank of Ashley. Permanently. The evidence I had gathered was damning. The contingent offer on the house, the years of financial siphoning, the maxed-out credit card in my name, it was a portfolio of deceit. My first instinct was to confront them, to lay out the files and watch their faces as they realized I knew everything. But what would that accomplish? It would lead to a screaming match, denials, and more emotional manipulation. They would twist the narrative, paint me as the villain, and play the victim. A direct confrontation was what they expected. I needed to do something they could never see coming. I needed to remove the object of their desire from the equation entirely. I had to make the cars disappear. The idea came to me in the middle of the night. If my collection was the asset they were trying to leverage, I would make it an unverifiable, untraceable ghost. They had made an offer contingent on the sale of my cars. That contingency would fail if the cars were no longer mine to sell, or more accurately, if they no longer knew where the cars were. I called Leo the next morning. "I need your help," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need to move all 12 cars, tonight, and they need to go somewhere no one can find them." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a low whistle. "All 12? Ash, that's a fleet. That's a massive logistical operation. Where are we taking them?" "I've found a place," I explained. I had spent the previous night scouring specialty storage listings. I found a high-end, discreet facility 2 states away. It catered to collectors who wanted absolute anonymity and security. It had climate control, 24/7 surveillance, and most importantly, it was registered under a new LLC I had created that morning, an entity with no visible ties to my name. "It's a ghost garage, Leo. We move them tonight under the cover of darkness. By the time my family even thinks to check, they'll be gone." Leo was silent for a beat. Then he said, "I'll need to call in some favors. I'll need 2 flatbed trucks and at least 3 other trusted drivers. It's going to cost you." "Whatever it takes," I replied without hesitation. The plan was set in motion with military precision. Leo was a logistical wizard. By noon, he had secured 2 enclosed car haulers, the kind used for transporting priceless vehicles, and had assembled a small, tight-lipped crew of his most trusted colleagues, fellow mechanics and restorers who valued privacy and a hefty cash payment above all else. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. I went to the bank and withdrew a large amount of cash to pay the crew and to cover any unforeseen expenses. I packed a small go-bag with a change of clothes and essentials. I arranged for a short-term rental car to be delivered to my house. My daily driver was part of the collection and would be going with the others. As dusk fell, my quiet suburban street began to look like a scene from a heist movie. The 2 massive, unmarked transport trucks parked a block away, their engines rumbling quietly. Leo and his crew arrived in a nondescript van. We worked in near-total silence, communicating with hand signals and hushed whispers. The tension was thick, a mixture of adrenaline and a strange sense of liberation. The first car to be loaded was the Shelby GT 500, Grandpa's car. As Leo carefully guided it up the ramp into the enclosed trailer, I felt a lump form in my throat. I was moving a piece of my history, a piece of my soul, into hiding. But it wasn't an act of surrender, it was an act of protection. One by one, we moved them. The sleek, low-slung Ferrari F40, the elegant Aston Martin DB5, the classic Porsche 356. Each engine that roared to life in the stillness of the night felt like a small cry of defiance. We were a silent, efficient team. We placed magnetic covers over the license plates. We used specific routes that avoided major highways as much as possible. It took nearly 4 hours. By 2 a.m., my garage, once a gleaming showroom of automotive history, stood empty. The cavernous space, smelling faintly of wax and gasoline, was eerie in its silence. The tire marks on the polished concrete floor were the only evidence that the collection had ever been there. I handed Leo a thick envelope of cash. He counted it quickly and then pushed half of it back toward me. "This is for the crew," he said, nodding toward the others. "The rest is too much. You're my friend, Ash. Seeing the look on your face when this is all over, that's the other half of my payment." I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought me to tears. In the midst of my own family's betrayal, the loyalty of a true friend was a powerful anchor. Leo and one of his driver. S would take the haulers on the long, overnight drive to the storage facility. The others dispersed as quietly as they had arrived. I got into my rental car and followed the trucks for the first hour, watching their taillights disappear into the darkness. Then I turned back. My part in the physical move was over. The next phase of the plan was about to begin. I drove home to my silent house and my empty garage. I didn't feel loss. I felt a profound sense of peace. The asset was secure. The bait had been removed from the trap. My parents had built their entire scheme on the foundation of my car collection. I had just removed that foundation, brick by painstaking brick, in the middle of the night. They were about to discover that their dream house for Megan was built on nothing but thin air. With the cars safely tucked away 2 states over, the board was set. Now, I just had to wait for my family to make their next move. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the midnight exodus, my phone rang. It was the real estate agent for the house in Willow Creek. "Hi, Ashley," she said, her voice a little strained. "I'm calling on behalf of the sellers of 123 Bluebell Lane. They received a contingency offer from a David and Susan, who listed you as their daughter and the source of the funds from the sale of some assets. The contingency period is about to expire, and they haven't received any updates. David and Susan aren't returning my calls. Since your name was mentioned, I was hoping you could shed some light on the situation." Her tone was professional, but the underlying message was clear. My parents had gone silent, and the deal was about to collapse. This was my moment. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I have no intention of selling any of my assets. I was not a party to that offer, and they were not authorized to use my name or my financial standing in any negotiation. I recommend you inform the sellers that the buyers do not have the funds to close this deal." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," the agent finally managed to say. I see. Thank you for clarifying." I hung up, a grim satisfaction settling over me. The first domino had fallen. I knew the agent would immediately call the sellers, who would then instruct her to terminate the offer and put the house back on the market. Then, she would undoubtedly leave a series of increasingly frantic messages for my parents. The fallout arrived on my doorstep 2 days later. It was a Saturday afternoon. A car screeched to a halt in my driveway, and my father stormed out, my mother and Megan trailing behind him. He hammered on my front door, not even bothering with the bell. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stood there, blocking the entrance. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked calmly. His face was a mask of fury. "The deal fell through?" he roared, waving his phone in the air. "The agent called and said we were in breach of contract. She said you told her you weren't selling. What have you done?" "I told her the truth," I replied, my voice even. "I told her that I was not selling my cars and that you made a fraudulent offer using my assets without my permission." "Fraudulent?" my mother gasped, clutching her chest. "We were doing this for your sister, for the family." Megan started crying, her signature move. "My house," she sobbed. "I loved that house, Ashley. How could you be so selfish?" "Your house," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "The one you were going to buy with money from my life's work, the house you felt so entitled to that you didn't even bother to thank me in advance." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door of my garage. "But please, come in. Let's talk about the assets in question." They pushed past me, their eyes fixed on the garage. They walked in, expecting to see the gleaming chrome and polished paint of their personal piggy bank. Instead, they were met with nothing. The vast, empty space echoed with their footsteps. The concrete floor was clean, bare except for the faint outlines of where the tires used to be. The tool chests were closed, the car covers were folded and stacked in a corner. It was a void. They stopped dead in their tracks, their mouths hanging open. My mom's hand flew to her face. My dad spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief and panic. "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Where are the cars?" "They're gone," I said simply. "What do you mean gone?" he stammered. "Did you sell them? Where's the money?" "I didn't sell them," I said, savoring the moment of their confusion. "I moved them. They're in a safe, secure, and very private location, and you will never know where that is." The reality of the situation slowly dawned on their faces. The asset was gone. Their leverage was gone. Their plan was in ruins. "Why?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this to us?" That was the question. That broke the dam. All the pain, anger, and betrayal of the past few weeks came pouring out of me. "To you," I said, my voice rising with every word. "You're the ones who gave me an ultimatum. You're the ones who tried to force me to sell my grandfather's legacy. You're the ones who have been using me as a bank account for years." I pulled out the file I had prepared. I threw the credit card statements on the workbench. "You want to talk about betrayal? Let's talk about this credit card, maxed out with Megan's brunch dates and boutique shopping, a card you encouraged me to cosign for and have been secretly paying off. My credit is now damaged because of your deception." I threw down the bank records. "Let's talk about the tens of thousands of dollars I've given you over the years for Megan's emergencies, which was actually just funding her refusal to grow up." Finally, I held up a printout of the real estate listing. "And let's talk about this. A fraudulent offer on a house, made with the assumption that you owned me and everything I've ever worked for." They stood in stunned silence, a jury listening to an indictment they could not refute. The evidence was undeniable. Megan looked at the credit card statements and turned pale. My mother just shook her head, muttering, "We were just trying to help." My father's rage had evaporated, replaced by a hollow, defeated look. He, the retired engineer, the man of plans and structures, had been completely outmaneuvered. His entire project had collapsed. "The Bank of Ashley is closed," I said, my voice ringing with finality in the empty garage. "Megan, you are an adult. It is time you started acting like one. Get a job, support yourself. Mom, Dad, you need to stop enabling her. You have crippled her with your misguided protection." I walked toward the door leading back into my house. "I think you should all leave now." They didn't argue. They shuffled out of the garage like ghosts, their grand ambitions reduced to dust. As they got into their car, my father looked back at me, his expression unreadable. There was no apology, no remorse. There was only the quiet shock of someone who had played a game and lost spectacularly. I closed the garage door, and the echo of the empty room was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. The aftermath of the confrontation was exactly what I expected: complete and total silence. It was different from the strategic, manipulative silence they had employed after the ultimatum. This was the silence of defeat, of shame, and of a severed connection. Weeks turned into months. I heard nothing from my parents or Megan. The smear campaign among my extended family also died down. I suspect the truth of the maxed-out credit card and the fraudulent house offer had a way of recalibrating their sympathies. I used the time to rebuild. First, I tackled the financial damage. I paid off the credit card in full, a bitter pill to swallow, but necessary to protect my credit score. The moment the balance was zero, I canceled the card and sent a certified letter to my parents and Megan, informing them that my name and credit were no longer available to them for any purpose. It felt like closing a wound. The silence was lonely at times, especially around holidays. I missed the family I once thought I had. But as Leah wisely pointed out one evening over pizza, I was missing a fantasy. The reality was far more toxic, and I was better off without it. "You didn't lose a family," he said. "You escaped a financial arrangement that was disguised as one." He was right, and my life began to flourish in the space they had left behind. I focused on my work, my friendships, and myself. Without the constant drain of my family's manufactured crises, I had more time, more energy, and more peace of mind than I'd had in years. I even started dating someone, a kind architect who was fascinated and supportive of my passion for cars, not threatened or dismissive of it. About 6 months after the confrontation, I brought the cars back. Leo organized the return trip with the same quiet efficiency as the departure. Watching the haulers back into my driveway and unload my collection felt like a homecoming. As the Shelby GT 500 rolled back into its spot in the garage, I ran my hand over its fender, a wave of emotion washing over me. They were safe. They were still mine. I had protected my grandfather's legacy, and in doing so, had finally learned to protect myself. The garage was no longer just a collection of cars. It was a symbol of my independence. The most unexpected development came nearly a year after that fateful day. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. The message was short, just a photo and a few words. The photo was of a set of keys on a simple, particle board countertop. In the background, I could see a small, clean, but very empty apartment. The words below the photo read, Mo. Ved into my first place today. Paid the deposit and first month's rent myself. I start my new job on Monday. It was from Megan. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind reeling. I zoomed in on the photo. The keys were for a modest apartment, not a house. The countertop was from a rental, not an owned property. The words paid myself and new job were the most shocking part of it all. I didn't reply immediately. I wasn't sure what to say. Was this an olive branch? A cry for attention? An attempt to win back my favor? I showed the text to Leo. He looked at it, nodded slowly, and said, "It's not about you, Ash, it's about her. You didn't just save your cars that day. You might have just saved your sister." His words stuck with me. By closing the bank, by removing the safety net, I had forced Megan to face the one thing my parents never had: reality. She had been thrown into the deep end and, to my astonishment, had learned to swim. It wasn't the life my parents had envisioned for her, a life of artistic leisure funded by me, but it was a life she was building for herself. The text wasn't asking for anything. It was a statement. It was a quiet declaration of independence, one she had to earn. After a few hours of thought, I typed a simple reply. "Congratulations, that's a huge accomplishment. I'm proud of you." The 3 little dots appeared and disappeared for a while. Then, a one-word response came back. "Thanks." It wasn't a fix. It didn't erase the years of manipulation or the pain of the betrayal. My relationship with my parents is still non-existent. They have never reached out, and I have made no effort to contact them. But that short, simple text exchange with my sister felt like the true resolution. The revenge I got wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't about seeing my family punished. It was about forcing a change that needed to happen. It was about the quiet satisfaction of seeing my sister finally stand on her own 2 feet. That evening, I went out to my garage, turned on the lights, and just sat there for a while, surrounded by my grandfather's legacy. I had protected it, but the story was no longer just about the cars. It was about the sound of a turning key, not the key in an ignition of a priceless Ferrari, but the key to a simple, first-floor apartment, a key my sister had earned all by herself. And that was a sound more valuable than any engine's roar.